Well, now the clock is 11, and with me today I have Claus Sindal, Head of IR in Hansa Biopharma. And welcome to the audience, and you're more than welcome to post your questions in the chat on the right, and I will forward them to Claus during the presentation. Today's presentation will primarily be a Q&A, but Claus, of course, brought a couple of slides so we can quickly run through the highlights and the pipeline. So first of all, Claus, welcome to you. Nice to have you live again.
Thank you so much, Klaus, and always a pleasure to be here. Yes, can you see my slides?
See your slides.
Yes, good. We'll enter into presentation mode here. Yes, so first of all, I wanted to say thank you so much for your interest, and please, feel free to ask questions during the session, and I'll do try to do my best to address those questions. But if we should start talking about 2022 and Q4 in particular for Hansa Biopharma, we had a very successful year with now sales start to really materialize. So for 2022 we had revenue of 155 million Swedish kronor, including 86 million in product sales, and the remaining being contract revenue from our collaborations with Sarepta, with Aspire in gene therapy, and also another small collaboration with Access Shields. If we look at the progress overall for 2022, we have now secured pricing and reimbursement in 11 markets, including 4 of the 5 major markets, in particular the UK, France on an early access base reimbursed program, Germany, and also more recently Italy. So these are the 4 of the 5 major markets now we have secured. There's always a delay from pricing reimbursement has been executed, and until the protocols have been implemented, and then the centers will start to take on patients. As you know, we have a conditional approval, which means that we have initially started out to focus on the leading transplantation centers in Europe in order for them to generate experience and also for them to be centers of reference for other centers. So this is of critical importance for building the foundation, building the basis for future sales. Also, it's important to remember that we have to do a post-approval study in parallel with the commercial launch. And whether we like it or not, this will eat in on some of the commercial product sales, since we need to recruit 50 patients in this study. This study was started out in the summer last year, and we already have a good number of patients. So that's something, of course, we need to convert into commercial patients going forward when we have completed that post-approval study. That will be done at the latest in 2025. But overall, things are moving forward. We have good patient stories. I'm sure some of you have seen some of the published papers talking to how patients have been moved from dialysis. We had a story from one patient in Spain who has been on dialysis for 38 years. So this was a 54-year-old patient which was successfully transplanted in the spring and has basically been on dialysis since 1984, right? So these are the first experiences and the good stories, of course, we want to get out there. If we look at the more operating activities we have seen during 2022. We've also secured financing through 2 events. We had a structured financing secured with no request back in the summer, securing $70 million, which extended the cash runway into 2024. And then in December, we carried out a directed share issue with select international institutions, mainly from the US, which will extend our cash runway into 2025. So that was, of course, very good because, as you all know, biotech markets have been very, very challenging throughout most of the year. Towards the end of 2022, we also announced that we had positive top-line data in AMR. So this is for post-transplantation episodes where you want to avoid these rejections. And we showed significant superior capacity versus PLEX, plasma exchange, in reducing donor-specific antibodies post-transplantation. So this is very critical because you start to see these rejection episodes occurring, and you want to knock down these donor-specific antibodies to avoid that rejection to actually happen. So we are very pleased with those data points, and we expect full data readout post-summer this year. Also, we have seen development in our preclinical pipeline. First and foremost, we have completed IND-enabling tox studies with our second-generation enzyme program, NiceR, where we have chosen a lead candidate, and now we expect to start a new clinical study. We have actually just obtained a clinical trial application approval, which means that we can start a phase 1 in this program, or for this second generation of enzymes. And this will enable us to have repeat dosing and will open up a complete new space for Hansa, since our first generation enzyme imlifidase, as I'm sure all of you are aware of, only addresses a one-off knockdown. I mean, it's for monophasic acute diseases or for transplantation where you want to take down the donor-specific antibodies in one go, but it can only be used once. But we have now developed second-generation enzymes for repeat dosing in the preclinical phase, and will now move it into humans in healthy subjects initially. Then we're also very excited about moving our gene therapy program, which is a pre-treatment to Sarepta's gene therapy in Duchenne muscular dystrophy. We are moving that into the clinic this year. This is a significant opportunity for Hansa, since gene therapy in general, there are issues with neutralizing antibodies, preventing a high number of patients in being treated because of the delivery system, which is through a viral vector. And here the idea is that we will knock down these neutralizing antibodies and allow for patients to be treated. So the first program is with Sarepta in Duchenne, and Sarepta's program in phase 3 is accepted for BLA submission, and they expect an approval this summer. So it could go faster than most people expect if we can start this clinical trial in a small patient group. But let's see when we get to that. In anti-GBM, we have also commenced a new phase 3 trial. This is a pivotal trial. It's an ultra-rare indication, but we have previously shown very good data where 2 out of 3 patients basically could become dialysis independent. And normally it would be 2 out of 3 patients who would progress into dialysis or even die within 6 months. So this is, extraordinary results. And now we have commenced a new pivotal phase 3 study that will be done in 50 patients. It's a global study, so that will be done across the US, UK, and Europe. So we are very excited about this. And remember, even though this is an ultra-rare disease, probably we're talking about 1,000 patients annually across the US and Europe. I mean, there's no approved treatment, and the standard of care is plasma exchange. It's very insufficient. So here the anticipation is that we could potentially take a fairly high market share in this indication. So it's not insignificant for us, even though it's an ultra-rare indication. In GBS, enrollment actually has picked up again. We saw a slowness in enrollment due to clinics, especially in France, prioritizing resources to COVID and having less access to IVIG, which is part of the protocol. But now, after we have implemented a number of initiatives, we have started to see enrollment pick up again, and we expect to complete that trial in GBS this spring. So we only need 5 patients to complete it. So very exciting study, and it's 10,000 patients across the US and Europe. So it's not insignificant, even though it's a rare disease. On our US ConfIdeS trial, this is our pivotal phase 3 study in the US in kidney transplantation. Things are also moving ahead. However, we have to adjust the timeline for this trial. So we expect now to complete enrollment first half this year. It was previously second half last year, but we are very close. I mean, we reported yesterday 51 out of 64 patients being enrolled. Actually, today it's 52 patients, so it's only 12 patients who remains to be enrolled. Then we need to randomize patients, which is expected to be complete second half next year. And this should allow us for a BLA submission in 2024 and commercialization in 2025. So very, very pleased with that. And this is our entry into the US markets, which is probably the biggest validation for Hansa, right? Yeah, I think I will stop there. That was just a brief highlights of the Q4 development and an overall development of 2022, and then I will take questions. I think that will be more productive for the conversations.
Thanks a lot, Claus. And yeah, I already published a couple of questions, but if we just dwell a little with the Idefirix, because now you more or less checked all the boxes in terms of markets, in terms of reimbursement, so on and so forth in Europe. But to get the fair share of the available donor kidneys, is there any obstacles for highly sensitized patients? Do you experience that? And as you probably see from the question there as well, if you already received a donor kidney once, are you then in last in line again, or how do you interpret that?
No, you are actually more than qualified then to receive imlifidase treatment, because I mean, every time you are through a blood transfusion, you are through a transplantation, you will get exposed. You will get more donor-specific antibodies, which will make it even more difficult for you to find a match. And this is the barrier we can overcome with our technology, right? Where you can knock down the donor-specific antibodies and prevent that rejection. I mean, we can basically allow for that transplantation to happen for these patients. But obviously, we have to change the mindset of the doctor. They need to shift their focus on transplanting the less sensitized patients, which is, you know, the more easy one, to the more complex one. I mean, they need to get comfortable with our drug. They need to monitor the patients 3, 4, 5, 6 months even to see everything is good, because normally it's not been, or in the past up until now, it's not really been possible to transplant these patients. It was too high risk. They would see these rejections, right? And doctors would, you know, be less hesitant to prioritize these patients. But now it's a mind shift because they can actually do it. But we need to do it in a diligent manner. We need to do it in those patients who are not the very marginal, where this is the very last option, because these patients, you know, are hit by a lot of diseases, comorbidities, etc. So we need to ensure good outcomes so everybody is comfortable with our drug. Remember, this is, you know, the one single drug we use throughout the pipeline. So we would, you know, not risk jeopardizing it for other indication, and we need to obtain that full approval to really see sales accelerate, right? So this is a critical moment for Hansa, that we secure positive outcome rather than just increase the volume of transplanted patients, because we need to obtain that full approval.
Yes, and so this reluctance that some speculate about, that's fair enough, but actually you can address it with education of the doctors.
Absolutely. I mean, we are doing a great job in engaging with key opinion leaders. So these are advocates for Hansa. I mean, these are highly professional transplant surgeons who, you know, speak on our behalf, you know, conducting the first transplantations, and they should be our voice in the field, right? And it's very important that things go according to protocol, and we see successful outcomes. I mean, everybody can remember when AstraZeneca had this vaccine, right, during COVID pandemic, and suddenly you saw death, right, and the product was pulled back. We want to avoid a situation like that. We want to build confidence.
Of course. Can you say something about how or maybe elaborate a little on how would you roll it out in US when you get the necessary? Is it the same as in Europe, state by state, or is it?
Yeah, it's a very good and valid question. So thank you so much for that, because the dynamics are very different compared to Europe. In Europe, only two clinics participated in our 4 phase 2 programs in 46 patients. So it's very, very limited, the amount of clinics in Europe who actually have experience with imlifidase and these type of patients. So we basically, are using the commercialization here to educate these first clinics how to proceed with the patients so they get comfortable around this in order to obtain the full approval. In the US, things are different because we are running a full phase or a phase 3 study. And now we have said that we will do it in up to 20 clinics. So these clinics will generate experience during the phase 3 trial in 64 patients. So that's probably 3 to 4 patients on average per center. So that experience will be generated through the phase 3 trial. So once we get approval in the US, the slope of the uptake curve will be much faster than in Europe, where we've talked about an S-shaped curve, and it will take 2 to 3 years before we'll see accelerated sales. That will be different in the US because they have experienced themselves. They have seen experiences in Europe, which will allow for much faster uptake. And also the US is not as fragmented as in Europe, where you have so many countries. You have 28 countries with individual rules, regulations, guidelines, etc. Allocation systems. In the US, there's one system. There's one body where you need to get the pricing reimbursement, but that's it. And then the slope should be much faster, much more. We should see much more accelerated growth.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Claus. Well, then in general, now you mentioned the NICE study with some small delays, but in general, how is your perception of the environment within the public sector and of course the private as well, post-COVID, in relation to rolling patients into the program? Because this is high-end targeting high-end patients.
Yeah. In general, we have seen clinics being very mindful of this because, they have prioritized COVID patients. Regardless of how unique our drug is, we are in that category of highly sensitized patients who are very exposed in a COVID environment, right? And resources have also been prioritized towards COVID patients, meaning that there has been less time, less capacity, also less IVIG, which is part of the protocol in some of our studies. When you add all that up, that has caused some delays, some hiccups in the recruitment. Now we see in the ConfIdeS trial, we have to put a timeline into the spring here, but we are very close. We only need 12 patients to enroll. And then in the DBS trial, we have, especially in France and in our part of Europe, we have seen resources be directed to COVID, which has hampered their enrollment during the pandemic, but it's now picking up again. So we have 5 patients in the DBS trials. And then not to forget, transplantation volumes as such have been significant down, especially in Europe. It's, to the tune of 20-25% less transplantations going on simply because of the risk of these patients. So it has had an impact, but we're also seeing the light of the tunnel. We are seeing things pick up again, which is good.
Then I have a funny little question here, because I read this article in a scientific journal where a doctor actually used imlifidase to a lung patient I know it's off-label, and I know it's difficult to estimate anything on this. But on your next generation product, would you target other areas of therapy? And could that be lung transplantations, i.e.?
Yeah, it could definitely. Now this transplantation, which was executed in France, in Paris, that was with our first generation antibody cleaving enzyme imlifidase, and that was carried out successful. But I mean, we're not surprised of the result. I mean, we have a very clear mode of action with our drug. I mean, after a 50-minute infusion, you basically inactivate the IgG, which is relevant in so many different indication areas. It's only in kidney transplantation in deceased donors we have a label. But if you look at, lung, heart, bone marrow, I mean, it will be relevant to use our technology regardless, also across these acute autoimmune diseases. So I mean, we are not surprised. Of course, I mean, we cannot really communicate proactively around that lung transplantation patient because it's off-label, so we cannot encourage to that. But hospitals can, of course, publish patient cases, studies, and we can speak about that. And then for the second generation of enzymes, I mean, this is relevant in the space where we are in today, but also in an expanded space where you need the enzyme to do antibodies and a number of times. I mean, where you have to deal with these, flares popping up. The thing with the imlifidase is it can only be used one. It's monophasic acute, as we talked about during the presentation, because the body will start to recognize and you will be immune to it. But for the second generation, I mean, we have worked on protein engineered so it can be used a number of times. We don't know exactly how many times yet, but we are now testing it in healthy subjects. And from then we should have an idea of which indications to pursue, but very, very exciting times to go into that field.
For sure. And well, then let's jump a little to the sales. There's a couple of questions here. First of all, there's some questions regarding uptake compared to Q1. Why do you choose to sell yourself instead of partnering? And last but not least, if we look into the amount of patients in 2022, I know you don't give any guidelines at all, but and I know it's difficult times in the industry as well, and you still need the kidneys as well. But is it fair to assume that at least this level is feasible for 2023 as well? That's 3 questions. Sorry.
Yeah, let me start with the latter. Yeah, for obvious reasons, we don't guide because I mean it's a lower number of patients. This is a transformative new drug, as we talked about. I mean, we simply don't have the visibility. I mean, the range would be so enormous. I mean, it wouldn't make sense to come out with it because you could still see quarters with very low sales, and then you have other quarters, where it will pick up. It's basically, around order patterns, but also you have to remember. I mean, we only have a label for deceased donors, meaning that you need a dead body basically and carry out the organ to carry on with the transplantation. And I mean, it's simply not predictable to do it like that. I mean, we need to have established repeat business at the center level where they have seen positive outcome, where we can start to see traction. They will buy this product, a number of times during the year, etc. on average. But at this point in time, it would make no sense to come out with clear guidance. Rather, I would suggest people to look at the consensus. We have 12 banks covering Hansa, and they have sort of started to narrow down their expectations. And I mean, these are qualified estimates. I mean, probably the best you can get. So I would encourage people to look at the consensus to get a feel for where we are heading and when things will start to pick up, because they have an informed view. They are monitoring us on a daily basis, etc., rather than us coming out with a guidance which we in any way will not feel comfortable with. It would make more sense to rely on that.
Yeah, and just to address that for the audience, I know you in your presentation as of yesterday, you have a split in sales, and you remember, you mentioned early on that the price is around 3 million Danish.
No, not 3 million Danish. It's the list price, the pharmaceutical
List price.
Pharmaceutical list price. I mean, you need to apply certain discounts and rebates.
Of course.
Around 2 million Danish.
Yes.
And then, I mean, the further south we go, the further east, you should probably apply that to a larger extent. But in the first markets, I mean, this is clearly the price indication we believe. I mean, so people can do the math fairly easily to get an idea of, you know, how many patients we have treated when they look at our products. Yeah.
Thanks.
Then there was a question.
Yeah, regarding sales and partner sales, your strategy around that?
Yes, we have a clear strategy to go to market ourselves within transplantation and autoimmune indications. If you look at the landscape for transplantation, it's very, very few clinics. I mean, in Norway, Finland, you have only one clinic to do transplantation. It will not make sense to go through a partner and, you know, give them 30, 40, 50% of the revenue. I mean, we can do that ourselves. We have hired the best people in the field to do that. So we want to execute that and keep the value capture ourselves. It makes sense for us. When it comes to new indication areas such as oncology, gene therapy, we are not the primary assets, we are an enabler. So it makes sense to go through a partner. But having said that, it's only a rule of thumb, because when you go to new markets outside the US and Europe, it would probably make sense to go through a partner if you enter a market like China, Australia, Japan, or Mexico, South America, etc., because we don't have the competences, we don't have the know-how about these local market conditions, and here we would probably go through a partner. But in Europe and the US, it will not make sense. We would do this. We are the best to do it.
Thanks a lot, Claus. Thanks a lot. I don't know if there's further questions.
There was one question I see here on the timeline for anti-GBM.
Yes.
It's a question. Anti-GBM, the pivotal phase 3 study has just commenced. It will be 50 patients. Again, depending on the number of recruitment centers, I think we can, I mean, you can probably get a feel for the timeline in this. It's an ultra-rare indication, so it's probably only 1.6 patients per million. So we need many centers to get this study going. So the aim is to get 30 to 40 centers involved, so that's approximately 1.5 patients per center. So you can do some math here, right? But in case we get these centers up and running through 2023, I mean, you can do your assumptions, but it would probably be a couple of years.
Thanks a lot, Claus. Yeah, with that said, first of all, thanks a lot for all the nice questions to Claus, and thanks a lot to you, Claus, for participating in this event. So we will finish off the event for today, and enjoy your day. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.